Now I'd like to invite up the two consultants from NetBalance who've been working on this project. We have Suzi Young and Fiona Silke. So Suzi's experience encompasses climate change, resource efficiency and environmental consulting. Her qualifications include not only chemical engineering but also history and economics. She's worked for government and private clients across various market areas including water, energy, mining, food and manufacturing. And Fiona holds a Masters of Environment in addition to her bachelor's degrees in economics, so you can see we like multidisciplinary people here, and arts. And before joining NetBalance, she worked for the Victorian Department of Treasury and Finance, where she provided economic analysis on environmental policies including waste, air pollution, drought and water policies. So please welcome Suzi and Fiona.
I'd just like to thank Hartmut for that great introduction. We are the consultants, and yes, it has been an amazing, and we've been very privileged to work on this project. And I'd actually like to start by thanking a few other contributors who couldn't be here today, and that includes Rod Marsh, who was involved from the beginning. And I think he started working with the City of Greater Geelong, developing their climate change adaptation strategy, and we inherited a lot of his work. So I'd like to acknowledge Rod Marsh. And also Stephanie Niall, who wanted to be here today, but thought she might cause a little bit of drama by going into labour. So I actually understand what that might feel like. So, but yeah, Stephanie was a key author and has been involved right up until Monday. So, and did send us an email last night. So she has been very, very involved. And I'd also like to acknowledge Christoph, who works at NetBalance, who would love to be here today, but he didn't want to spread his germs. So we're also very relieved about that too. I just wanted to start by giving just a brief project background. So it did start, the journey started in 2010, and it was with NetBalance through Rod and Steph, developing the climate change adaptation strategy. Coming out of the strategy was a key action, and that was, and this is good language here, adopting robust decision-making processes for responding to climate change impacts and planning for adaptation across council. Now, I think the key question in all of this is, how do you actually do that? And again, the key term, mainstreaming and awareness of climate change risks and adaptation responses throughout council. And being on the journey with the City of Greater Geelong, I think it was acknowledged that this actually is going to take a little bit of work and some thinking and sort of unpacking what we mean by mainstreaming, and also sort of, I guess, avoiding, or not avoiding, I should say, actually acknowledging uncertainty and unpacking what that means. So rather than sort of, and we do live, I think it's a beautiful quote that Hartmut had about climate change adaptation in the context of the road less travelled. Uncertainty should be acknowledged, but it's not a reason to not act. And that's something that we've tried to do, and we sort of acknowledge up front in this toolkit. So we wanted to sort of explore and acknowledge and describe so that we can actually come up with appropriate responses to that uncertainty. This has been a collaborative project. I think it's been acknowledged a few times, and I do encourage everyone to continue that sort of open dialogue. And I think it was acknowledged very early on in climate change. We do need to respect each other. It is a really challenging thing for organisations and communities. And this process, I guess, at the end of the day, is all about building community resilience, and it's knowing our neighbours and making sure we can respond when the impacts hit. And this has been a great, just amazing privilege for us, because as consultants often you are just sort of project based, and we've had an opportunity to work to have our sort of ear to the ground in terms of the literature that's coming out of academic circles, but then also being really conscious of it being practical. At the end of the day, I know there are lots of practitioners in the room, and again we have lots of theories, but what does it actually mean when the tyre hits the road? How do you actually do this stuff? So it is very much based in risk management, so ISO 31000, and the starting point for this tool is a basic, that you have done a sort of basic risk assessment. This is a bit of a schematic of of the tool, so there it is. So it starts with priority risks. So it assumes that you have actually done a risk assessment, identified priority risks, and then the next step, and tool 1, is exploring those risks in detail. Again, acknowledging uncertainty. So a big emphasis on that is questions around what that uncertainty is and what that might mean in terms of adaptation actions. That then goes into tool 2, which is about developing appropriate adaptation actions. And Fiona will talk in detail about what sort of sits underneath each of these tools. But tool 2, again, acknowledges that uncertainty and encourages the use of scenarios. I'm not sure, has anyone actually ever used sort of scenario planning currently in their sort of, just get a bit of a feel? Yep, great. So this is about testing adaptation actions against future narratives. So that's sort of one key element of that work. And then finally, tool 3, I think this is probably quite an interesting tool and process. And this is about it's about the mainstreaming, to use a jargon term, but it's about identifying climate change interactions with other decisions that are made throughout organisations. So it's a screening tool that gives you an opportunity to say, do I need to actually consider climate change in this decision? And this is, I guess we really encourage that this is used in all sort of processes and decision-making processes that need to be made within organisations. So we have 3 tools. We have the toolkit. It is free to download, and I guess this is just the beginning for us as well. I appreciate that we've developed a process, but a lot of the thinking still needs to be done, and so it's not going to have all the answers, but it's a starting point for us. It's a process, and we would love to have your feedback and to sort of share some of that journey with you, because we're all learning. It's all new, and some paths are going to be right for some organisations, some paths are going to be wrong, but very interested to hear your stories as well. So thank you and good luck.
All right, so I think I get the hard bit, because now I have to explain something in a very short amount of time, something that's very, very complicated, and that there's a big user guide to help you step you through. So I'm really going to touch on things today and give you a flavour of what's in the toolkit. But there is a lot of detail in there, so please go and read the user guide, because there's a lot of good work that's gone into that and a lot of useful things, I think, for all organisations. But to start off with the first tool, which actually each tool comes with different activities underneath it. So these activities are designed to step you through the sorts of things that you might need to consider in this stage around risk or adaptation action. So the first one is really about taking those risks that you've already identified and getting a bit more detail around them, so you can then develop potential adaptation actions to mitigate some of those risks. So here I'd like to kind of highlight activity 2. So activity 2 is really where the uncertainty stuff comes into it, because I think, as Hartmut kind of alluded to, uncertainty can be quite paralysing and you don't really know what to do with that. So this tool really helps kind of outline some broad categories of uncertainty. So this might be, there's uncertainty around the science of what plant species might adapt or how animals might adapt to the changing climate, or there might be uncertainty around technology thresholds. For example, with councils, it might be around roads, like how do we know how quickly roads will deteriorate, or when is the point of that they might actually need to be replaced and regenerated with some technologies that can deal with higher heat temperatures and things like that. So there's those sorts of categories to help you kind of think about and articulate, well, with the risk that I'm thinking about, what are some of the things that I need, that I might not know in this space? And then from there, it kind of takes you through, well, can I resolve this risk? So it's, can I resolve the uncertainty? So it's kind of things like, well, do I just not know that, but I know the answer's out there somewhere? So then you might have a few actions coming out of that, going and getting some, looking for some further research, getting some further research done. But the answer to that might be, well, actually, no, the answer's not out there. So then it might be, well, can I answer it myself? Or do I just have to live with the uncertainty? And I guess in this space, you really want to challenge that acceptance of uncertainty, because maybe you kind of want to challenge that a bit more, because I think often people might go, oh, it's climate change, I don't know everything, so I'm just going to continue on. But really what's important is that you kind of do go out there and make sure your search is quite thorough, because a lot of people are thinking about these issues, so the answer might be out there. Another thing is uncertainty does exist, so you might need to know when you just say, all right, the uncertainty's there, I can't resolve it. Let me detail what it is, so then I can use it later to inform some of the actions that I might take to resolve this risk. And this is what this step is really about. It's about detailing all the different parts of the risk and uncertainty, so you can then use it in the next tool to develop those mitigation actions. So tool 2, and so this is really about taking the detailed risk and saying, all right, well, what can I do about this? What are some of the actions and options that I have to actually reduce the risk or mitigate it or just accept it? So here, again, there's some interesting ways around how you might brainstorm adaptation actions. So there's different kinds of actions you might take under this step, like you might just accept that the risk is there and you might just be prepared for it. So that's definitely an action you might take in this space. You might also look at some risk sharing options. So insurance is a really good example of this, where insurance markets, everyone gets insurance and you kind of spread the risk across a bigger, broader group. Other ways that you might think about this is modifying a risk. So, and this is kind of using the analysis that you've done in Tool 1 that will really help you see where the elements in the risk that you might actually be able to mitigate. So for example, one place you might be able to look is the exposure of the risk. So can you affect the exposure of your risk? So coastal sea level rise is one example, and so there you might be able to actually move the community away from the coast, which is one way of removing that exposure. But alternatively, you might want to deal with the sensitivity of that risk. So same community, you might just force them to build on stilts, which means that the sea can come in and they can still live there. So there's those sorts of options around where you might be able to target your adaptation options, and you might get a few different actions for one risk, which then you can take that through the further steps to evaluate and prioritise to see which one might actually be the best in your circumstance. And I think that's what's really important here. You kind of want a few solutions to the risk, because then you can kind of say, well, this one is not actually in our control, so we can't do that. Or this one is actually a win-win situation. We would do this anyway, even without adaptation, under a different future scenario. And just to mention here, as Suzi already has, scenarios is a key element to this. So scenarios really help you take and evaluate the adaptation action and say, all right, so under this potential future, what happens to this action? Will it be useless or will it be useful? Is it still effective? And so that's really useful when you think about, what if sea level rise rises by 4 metres, but what if it rises by 0.6? So you kind of want to have this flexibility kind of built into your adaptation actions to really not, I guess, waste time and money really, which is really important to most organisations. And I guess just to highlight, Tool 1 and 2 are really kind of quite complementary in this space. So they kind of really flow from each other. But when you get to Tool 3, it flows from Tool 1 and 2, but this is really the guts of the matter. And while Tool 1 and 2 are really focused on, well, what are climate risks? What are your adaptation actions? Tool 3 is really focused on almost any decision you can make in your organisation. So it's really about all decisions. If I want to, for a council, if I want to open up a new piece of land and rezone it so you can build on it, you would take that decision through this kind of process to help you include adaptation considerations in that decision-making process. And this is really seen as an adjunct to all your decision-making processes, which I'm sure you all have quite rigorous decision-making processes already. So here, what it's trying to do is really just get you to think about, well, what does this proposal do? Does it generate a new climate risk? So in the rezoning one, maybe you want to open up some coastal land or some land near a creek. And at the moment, that land near the creek is totally viable for development, but under some climate change scenarios, with increased rainfall, you might get increased flooding, and then all of a sudden, that particular creek, which is a drain, might actually flood over and could affect the development there. So that's kind of generating a new risk that you might not have already. And so this is kind of stepping you through, well, if that's the case, what do I do from there? It's also kind of considering, is there new vulnerabilities or existing vulnerabilities that it might be exacerbated? So, you know, increasing the number of people near the coast exacerbates potential risks around coastal inundation and things like that. It's also looking at, well, does this interact with other adaptation actions that we might be thinking about doing? Because obviously if you're trying to do good over here with an adaptation action, but then you completely undermine it with a different project over here, that's actually counterintuitive, and that's not what we want to do. So it's kind of really trying to get every person in the organisation, when they come to do any proposal, how is this affecting the climate change risk or the adaptation actions of our organisation? And from here, it's once you've kind of stepped through these stages, it has kind of different actions that, depending on the result of what you might think about doing. And I think this is the part that really is about the mainstreaming and really is about embedding. So it is a really, really important step. And I think that's kind of it in terms of all the tools. I think what is really interesting is, so tool 1 and 2 might be actually used maybe once a year. You might review your results, and that kind of sits there as a product, as like a register of adaptation actions and risks. But tool 3 should really be used every time a decision is made. So this will be used again and again and again. And I'm sure Berksu next will talk you through about how they're actually thinking about how they might actually take the thinking in the tool here and apply it in their organisation. Thanks.